Now, clubfoot treatment is prolonged. It begins with screening at the community level as well as in the hospital and usually ends by discontinuation of the braces at the age of 5 years. Hence, it involves many steps which have to be executed very precisely to get the optimal outcome. Hence, we now will say that Ponseti treatment is Ponseti clubfoot care pathway, which involves multiple steps, which I'll show you gradually. Now, I hope you all have, those who are interested in clubfoot must read this master book by Ponseti himself. And this paragraph, basically, it is the crux of this book, which says a well conducted orthopedic treatment based on a sound understanding of the functional anatomy of the foot and of the biological response of young connective tissue and bone to changes in the direction of mechanical stimuli can gradually reduce or almost eliminate these deformities in most clubfoot. Now, it may sound very confusing to a beginner, but I'll simplify. I'll begin first with the functional anatomy. So before you understand Ponseti, you need to know what is the anatomy, pathoanatomy of the clubfoot. So clubfoot, as we know, is a easily diagnosed deformity at birth, unlike DDH, where it is commonly missed and can be easily remembered by a mnemonic K, cavus, adductus, varus, and equinus. Now, cavus is what? Increased height of the medial longitudinal arch of the foot due to excessive plantar flexion of the first metatarsal as compared to fifth. Adductus is medial deviation of the forefoot. Varus is deviation of the heel towards the medial body plane. And equinus is easy to understand, plantar flexion of the foot at the ankle as well as at the subtalar joint. Now, coming to the functional anatomy, and before we go into the functional anatomy, let us understand the pathoanatomy. So, what is the pathoanatomy of the clubfoot? In fact, clubfoot involves a multiple tarsal joints malalignment, okay, as well as deformities of the various tarsal bones, especially of the talus. And these are maintained by the contracture of the soft tissues, which is called retracting fibrosis of the capsule and the ligaments. So, I'll briefly go into each of them one by one. So, let us understand the tarsal joint malalignment first. Now, there are various tarsal joints in the clubfoot which are malaligned. Like so, we'll begin with this subtalar complex, which involves talocalcaneum joint and the talonavicular and calcaneocuboid joint, followed by cuneiform first metatarsal joint and the ankle joint. So now, before you understand the movements, what are the malalignment at the talocalcaneum joint, you all are familiar with these terms: abduction, adduction, and the equinus, calcaneus, eversion. And I think most of my younger colleagues are not familiar with these terminologies. And because the clubfoot deformity does not occur in one plane, it involves multiple planes or axes. And you can see from this diagram that all these deformities occur in different planes. So I'll come to these planes one by one. So you all know when you describe the fracture, you describe three standard reference planes. What are these? Sagittal, coronal, and the transverse plane. Now, what I'm describing is the subtalar joint. So I'll describe the movements of in these planes, taking calcaneum as the index bone. So first go into sagittal plane. Now in the sagittal plane, the each plane has axis, okay, which lie perpendicular to the each plane. So in the sagittal plane, there is an axis which runs from side to side. In the coronal plane, axis runs from front to back, and in the tarsal plane, in the transverse plane, the axis runs from top to bottom. So I hope I'll just go into there are three standard planes: sagittal, coronal, transverse, and the three axes which are in the different perpendicular to the different planes. So let us see now sagittal plane movement of the subtalar joint using calcaneum as the index bone. Now, what are the movements which occur in the sagittal plane? They are in the equinus and the calcaneus. So equinus occurs when the distal part of the calcaneum or the distal part of the any bone moves in plantar flexion. And calcaneus occurs when the distal part of the bone moves into extension, that is dorsiflexion. So the calcaneus is in clubfoot, calcaneus is in plantar flexion. Now in the transverse plane, the calcaneus distal part moves towards the midline. It is called adduction. Okay. I hope you can understand from these diagrams. If it moves away from the midline, it is called abduction. And in the coronal plane, this is important to understand, where axis runs from front to back. Okay. the movements are inversion and eversion. So if the plantar surface faces towards the midline, okay, it is turning towards the midline, it is called inversion. And if faces away from the midline, it is called eversion. So the subtalar joint now has all these deformities or all these abnormal posture. So in clubfoot, calcaneum is rotated in all the three planes. This is the crux of clubfoot. Remember, the calcaneum is plantar flexed in the sagittal plane, adducted in the transverse plane, and inverted in the coronal plane. So calcaneum is plantar flexed, adducted, and inverted. As a result, the hind foot goes into varus. Okay? So the hind foot is a varus deformity due to these. So clubfoot is a three-dimensional deformity. Okay? So subtalar joint has this three-dimensional deformity. Now, this joint, now what is, you have been listening to the word kinematic coupling. So all these movements, adduction, inversion, and equinus at the subtalar joint are kinematically coupled. Okay, so what is kinematic coupling? That the when the calcaneum adducts, it also goes into inversion as well as equinus at the subtalar joint. So this is called supination. Okay. Now, what is pronation? Sure. Sure. The heel goes into valgus. Okay. So these subtalar movements are kinematically coupled. So just to repeat it again, when the calcaneum adducts, it must go into obligatory. Okay, remember what obligatory inversion and plantar flexion, and heel will go into varus. And when the calcaneum abducts, it must go into obligatory eversion and dorsal extension, and heel goes into valgus. So I think the clubfoot mimics like this. So in the clubfoot, calcaneum is adducted, inverted, and plantar flexed. And what we need to do is we need to abduct, evert, and dorsal extend. So how do you do this? Come to that by the principle of functional interdependence. Now let me finish these joints: talonavicular and calcaneocuboid joints. They are mainly deviated in the transverse plane. Adduction is easy to understand, that movement of the forefoot, especially the cuboid and the navicular, towards the medial body plane. As a result, the navicular is almost in contact with the medial malleolus. Okay? Now, what about the cuneiform first metatarsal joint and the ankle joint? They are deformed in the sagittal plane only. Cavus is due to plantar flexion of the first metatarsal, and equinus is due to plantar flexion of the ankle of the talus at the ankle joint. Now, you have now understood these are normal movement. So now easy to understand why the cave is there. Why we say that deformity represents the cave. Now, cavus is due to plantar flexion of the first metatarsal at the cuneiform joint, leading to cavus deformity. Adduction is due to talonavicular and calcaneocuboid joint, which are adducted, leading to adduction deformity. The heel varus is due to subtalar joint, supination of the subtalar joint, which is adducted, inverted, and in plantar flexion, leading to varus. And equinus is due to plantar flexion of the tibiotalar joint. Okay, so I hope there is no confusion. You have understood the tarsal joint malalignment in clubfoot. Now coming to the tarsal bone deformities. Okay, now tarsal bone deformities, there are many tarsal bones, but remember, among all the tarsal bones, talus is the most deformed bone. But remember, it is least displaced as compared to calcaneum, which is though least deformed but most displaced. So remember these golden lines, that talus is the most deformed bone. So I'll discuss what are the deformities, talus bone deformity in a clubfoot. First, let us see the normal shape. Normal shape looks like this. Okay? There is a slight medial inclination. You can see the red angle. There's a dome-shaped head of the talus, and even lateral pole of navicular is round shape, okay, as you see from the blue curve. However, in clubfoot, you have a pathoanatomy like this, where the talar neck is short, as well as plantar flexed, as well as medially deviated. These red markings show the plantar medial deviation as well as the plantar deviation. The head of the talus, unlike round shape, it becomes smaller and wedge shape. Okay? Can you see this picture? And lateral pole of the navicular again becomes like a wedge shape. So these are the common tarsal bone deformities. And all these deformations are now basically fixed by this contracture of the soft tissues, capsules, ligament, which is called retracting fibrosis. So what happens in a clubfoot? There is a posteromedial contracture, which is called posteromedial retracting fibrosis of the non-osseous tissues. Muscles, ligaments, capsule, posteromedial to the ankle, subtalar, and talonavicular joint are not only abnormal in structure as well as insertion, leading to what is known as focal retracting fibrosis. And our aim of manipulation and casting is to stretch these fibrotic structures or bands. Okay. And not only the soft tissue, but there's abnormal vasculature. If you go by the literature, 20 to 54% of the cases have a deficient or absent dorsalis pedis flow, and which has a bearing, especially once you are doing the tenotomy, you have to take care of the posterior tibial, or if you are doing the open surgery of the clubfoot. Now, this was in brief the background. Okay, and I'll discuss the clinical aspects again briefly. How do you make a diagnosis? How do you classify, scoring, role of radiography, and the management, including casting, tenotomy, and the bracing. Okay. Now, first and foremost, how do you make a diagnosis? I think making a diagnosis should not be difficult. The deformity is quite obvious, and one can easily remember the mnemonic K. But what is important is at times you fail to examine the child completely. Hence, it is important to rule out other secondary types of clubfoot, especially neurogenic, syndromic, or arthrogrypotic, which have a different prognosis, and the management also slightly differs. Don't forget to examine the other joints, especially hips. Though DDH has it has not been proved that there's a close association of DDH with clubfoot. And another actually observation which has been seen and published also, that some of these cases, of almost 80% of these cases, have increased hip internal rotation on the affected side. This is important, especially at the time when the child is walking with the in-toeing and you think their foot seems to be corrected. So this in-toeing is most likely due to increased hip internal rotation, not due to any residual deformity in the clubfoot. Before you jump into the foot, this is important for my residents. Look, have a bird's eye view of the overall bird's eye view of the lower limb. There is a leg length discrepancy around 0.5 centimeter. Calf is atrophic, as you can see from this picture. Foot is small, bean shaped, or what is called the club shape. And remember, friends, the severity of the deformity varies even in a bilateral cases. Okay, it can vary from foot to foot. Okay, some are very severe, as you can see from the scoring, and some are very supple. Okay. So for descriptive purposes, for describing in the exam, you can divide foot into three regions: hind foot, comprising of talus and calcaneum; midfoot, comprising of navicular, cuboid, and the cuneiforms; and the forefoot, metatarsal and the phalanges. And then there are two joints, Chopard's and the tarsal joints, Lisfranc and the Chopard joint. Now, clinical features, I think very easy to remember if you know the scoring also. The hind foot has, if you now, how to describe the clinical features? Better to describe region wise. So on a hind foot inspection, you can see there's a single posterior crease, which is usually deep. The heel is small, high riding, and in varus, medially deviated. Difficult to palpate calcaneum, which is called fatty heel pad, and you have a scoring for this, and marked equinus. Okay, so these are common features seen in the hind foot. In the forefoot, in the midfoot, we have a deep transverse crease, similar to the posterior crease, cavus deformity due to plantar flexion of the first metatarsal, and important thing, head of the talus can be easily palpated on the dorsolateral aspect. Normally, you cannot palpate in normal foot. You cannot palpate head of the talus because it is covered by navicular. But in a club foot, because navicular is medially deviated, as I showed you, the head of the talus is easily palpable, and this is an important landmark for the Ponseti method because this is the fulcrum for correction during the Ponseti method. And you have a midline deviation, especially in the midfoot as well as in the forefoot, leading to what is known as adduction deformity. Okay, so I think that making a diagnosis is easy, and once you have made a diagnosis, it is very important to classify whether it's a idiopathic or it's a secondary type of clubfoot. So let us see, how do you classify? The commonly what you see is a typical clubfoot or idiopathic clubfoot is which is an isolated deformity. There is no other congenital anomalies or any syndromic feature. The prognosis remains good, and if you score these, they usually correct by 5 to 6 casts. A good outcome, and the, the child does well. Vice versa, if case like this, and the pictures are it's themselves are highly actually they can show that the deformity is severe. They are associated with other congenital anomalies, syndromes like arthrogypotic, in this case, amniotic band, or genetic abnormalities, or like tibial hemimelia. So these are cases which, though are managed by Ponseti method, but behave differently. In that, their prognosis actually depends on the underlying condition rather than on the foot. But they are again managed by the Ponseti method. Then the neuromuscular clubfoot, underlying neuromuscular cause like myelomeningocele or myopathies, which also behave quite differently. Now, this is the clubfoot which I want to talk. The untreated walking child, which we see in our clinics regularly, in spite of clubfoot being a commonest congenital anomaly seen by all of us. In fact, this has also been named as neglected. I think the preferred term is untreated walking child. So this is described as a untreated clubfoot in a walking child who had little or no treatment in the past. Now, why this behaves differently? Because of the weight bearing and the deforming forces, these children develop adaptive changes in the foot in the form of contractures, fixed contractures. The retractile fibrosis becomes fixed, difficult to stretch. They develop callosities, and as a result, they develop they walk on callosities. They have painful gait, and again, it presents with a different spectrum of deformities. Some are easily managed by Ponseti, and some require a la carte surgeries. So Ponseti does have a role, and we have many publications that Ponseti plays an important role even in these neglected cases. Now, what about this atypical clubfoot? I think those who are working in a clubfoot clinic must have seen these feet. Now, these feet are actually a variant of idiopathic clubfoot, that there are no congenital anomalies, and the foot presents like this. The deformities are similar, like cave, but there is severe equinus and a severe posterior crease, as you can see from this picture. And the contrasting feature is there's a deep plantar crease which extends almost to the lateral border. In a typical idiopathic clubfoot, the crease does not extend to the lateral border, and the forefoot is foreshortened. You can see the first ray, the great toe is shortened, and the thumb great and the hallux is hyperextended. So this foot actually behaves differently, and if you apply a normal typical Ponseti cast, the cast usually slips. So they have to be managed by a modified Ponseti method. Now, there is a confusion that either atypical clubfoot is similar to the complex foot. Now, the revised classification, the complex clubfoot, although looks like similar to the atypical clubfoot, is usually given this name after few casts. It's called iatrogenic deformity, identified after few casts, and with mother always brings a cast mold. And the common complaint is that cast slips and the correction usually stops. The features are typically same, except the foot will be seen swollen, tender, and red as compared to the atypical clubfoot, which presents at the time of birth. The tibia is bowed. Okay, okay, normally like a bow and arrow, it is bowed. The hind foot is flattened. There's a deep crease. Again, midfoot has a deep plantar crease, and the forefoot shows rigid equinus. All the metatarsal are now plantar flex, unlike the typical clubfoot in which only first metatarsal is plantar flex. All the metatarsal are plantar flex, which is also known as plantaris deformity, along with short and extended big toe. Again, the management is modified. Now, what is relapsed? So relapsed clubfoot is recurrence of one or more deformities, either cavus, usually rare, adductors, varus, or equinus in a previously well-corrected clubfoot. I would say well-documented also. So recurrence of any of these deformities classifies this foot as relapsed clubfoot. Now, relapsed clubfoot can be also further subdivided as early relapse, seen within 30 months. And the usual reason is non-compliance with the brace. And all these cases require repeat Ponseti casting followed by a vigilant bracing schedule. Versus late relapse seen after 30 months. And these are in addition to the non-compliance with bracing have due to growth factors and intrinsic muscle imbalance. and tibialis anterior tendon transfer along with a few surgical methods remains the treatment of choice in these children presenting after 2.5 years with relapse. Okay. Now, this terminology was introduced by Ellis and Lehman, residual or a persistent clubfoot. At times, you will see that foot was not fully corrected, but remained partially corrected, especially by the resident who was not familiar with the method of Ponseti. And these feet, they are termed as residual or persistent clubfoot due to incompletely performed or poorly performed Ponseti method. And this has been proved also in a study done at Posna, where they found that in individual practice, those who are not very much familiar with the Ponseti technique, the success rate was just 26.2%, versus in the clubfoot centers, those who were following the Ponseti method in its own proper way, the success rate was quite high, varying from 93 to 100%. So this shows that Ponseti method, though easy to learn, may not be applied in a similar way by all of us. Okay. And the post-surgical clubfoot, where you have one or more deformities following previous surgeries, like posteromedial soft tissue release, which is very commonly done almost like 10 years back. Now, what is difference between this and the neglected clubfoot? The deformities are rigid, resistant to standard Ponseti method, and usually require a difficult surgical approach. Now, assessing severity. Why we need to assess severity? Now, we need to why we need to score it. Now we have diabetes, we also see how is it severe diabetes or it's a mild to moderate diabetes. We should like to know the blood sugar level. Similar is the case. Now both these feet have clubfoot deformity, and I think by visual inspection one can say the foot on the right has a less severe deformity as compared to the foot on the left. But how much can we objectively classify? So question is why to assess, how to assess, and when to assess. Why to assess, I think, is easy to answer, whether our correction is progressing satisfactorily, and very important, is sternotomy indicated, and is it relapsing? How to assess? We have two beautiful scoring methods, Pirani and Demiglio. Pirani method is based on 6 physical signs, easy to understand, which I'll cover in this talk. And Demiglio is based on the position of the foot related to equinus, varus, and medial deviation. I think takes more time, Demiglio method, but both are equally good. Now coming to the Pirani method, and remember when to assess, they have to be, scoring has to be done in each visit, especially before starting and each visit when you are changing the cast. Okay. So Pirani score is based on 6 physical signs. Each score is given from score of 1 to 0. 1 means bad, 0.5 is in between, okay, and 0 is normal. So hindfoot score and midfoot score. I'll go one by one. And each score, how do you score? You gently correct the deformity passively, okay, until you feel the resistance. Okay. So it has to be a gentle manipulation and then you score it. So posterior crease is a visual inspection. And these photographs are, I think, self-explanatory. Multiple fine creases, 0. A deep shallow crease, single, 1. And 1 or 2 non-indenting shallow crease becomes 0.5. So what about this score? So this is a single non-shallow crease. Well, shallow crease, non-indenting, becomes a 0.5. Okay. So empty heel. So what you do in this, you palpate the calcaneum tuberosity through the fat pad, okay, at the corner of the heel. And in a club foot, we know there is a equinus deformity of the calcaneum. So the tuberosity is not palpable, given a score of 1. On deep palpation, the tuberosity can be palpated, zero point 0.5, and the 0 means immediately you can palpate. Rigid equinus, very easy to understand. It has to be done in knee flex 90 degree. If dorsiflexion above neutral, it becomes a 0, and short of neutral becomes a 1, and neutral becomes 0.5. Now, what is this? The score would be 0.5 because it's now foot is ready for the tenotomy. Now, medial crease. Again, if the medial crease is deep and changing the contour of the arch like this, it becomes a 1. 1 or 2 non-indenting creases becomes 0.5, and multiple fine creases like posterior multiple fine creases becomes 0. So what about these examples? It becomes 0.5 on the left and deep crease, and 1 on the right side. Now curved lateral border, remember this like a boomerang curve, sharp curve 1, gentle curve 0.5, and straight lateral border 0. Okay. So this is a gentle curve becomes zero point 0.5. And the last lateral head of the talus. And you all know that after going through the pathognomy that the teller head is palpable, bare. Lateral teller head is bare. So what you do is you gradually abduct the foot and see how much is the teller head palpable. So if teller head is easily palpable, the navicular does not reduce, it becomes 1. If you can palpate both the teller head as well as the navicular, it becomes zero point 0.5. But if navicular slides in between thumb and the head of the talus, and teller head is not palpable at all, it becomes a 0. So easy to understand for writing the two signs which are have to be seen. Look, medial crease, posterior crease, two signs you must feel with your fingers, empty heel and the head of the talus, and measure two signs, lateral border and the equinus. Okay. And what you do is, this is the example how the scoring changes with each cast. So you have to score with cast change, and this is the time the foot is ready for tenotomy and the post tenotomy. So these are the charts which we have in our clinic, and we put them on a graph so that it becomes a visual inspection how the correction is proceeding. Okay. Now, radiography. I think this is a bit controversial. Is there a role of radiography in clubfoot? Let us see. Actually, there is no role of radiography for diagnosis and management in a newborn or in an infant with clubfoot. The question is why? Because there is a very little ossification of the bones in clubfoot. If you see the newborn X-ray, you will see that only talus, calcaneum and cuboid are ossified at birth. Navicular, which ossifies at the 3 to 4 years of age, is not there at all. Moreover, their ossification centers are also in a centric location. And to get the good quality X-ray, you have to position the child in a standard manner, which is very difficult in a crying, agitated child. But despite these limitations, it does have a role in cases which are not responding to serial manipulation and casting. So you want to rule out, is there any congenital anomaly or synostosis between talus and calcaneum? And especially in late presenting and relapse cases where you're planning a surgery, especially tendon transfer, you want to see the ossification of the cuneiform. Now, increasingly, its role has been defined to assess dorsiflexion of the ankle, especially in a chubby child, where it's difficult to see actually the foot, does it require tenotomy? So this lateral X-ray is used as a pre-tenotomy before you do the tenotomy. I'll show you what you assess. Okay. Now, what you do, what is the role of radiographs? It is to find the relationship between the axes of talus and calcaneum, talocalcaneum angles, and talus and the first metatarsal angle. So these are the ways you take the AP and the lateral view, simulated weight bearing. Okay. Now, what you just remember, don't remember the angle measurement. Remember, in a normal foot, the talus and the calcaneum diverge from each other like a open scissor. Okay. You see open scissor like this. So they diverge from each other, and the axis of the talus and first metatarsal almost form a straight line. So this is called an open scissor picture. In a club foot, the scissor is closed. Okay. The talus and calcaneum are almost parallel, and the both are plantar flex in relation to the tibia. So this is a common picture, whatever positioning you may do. So this is the picture. The club foot looks like this. Now, what we are interested is usefulness of the lateral X-ray, especially pre-tenotomy. And this is relatively a new technique, that new approach basically, that you measure the lateral tibiocalcaneum angle. In a normal foot, I've drawn these lines. The axis of the talus almost aligns perpendicular to tibia, almost, and the calcaneum dorsiflexes above a right angle. So this angle, lateral tibiocalcaneum angle, is less than 80 degrees. Okay? So this is a normal foot done in a proper position lateral X-ray. So why this angle is important? Because this angle represents pure ankle motion, not affected by the midfoot positioning. And this assesses the dorsiflexion at the ankle joint and defines the need for percutaneous tenotomy, especially in a child, not in every case, especially when there is a doubt, chubby feet, to whether it's a pseudo correction or it's actually the deformity is still not corrected. Okay. So these are some of the cases. This child, the deformity looks to be corrected. The ankle seems to be dorsiflexed on forced dorsiflexion. The ankle dorsiflexion seems more than 10 degrees, but the same X-ray shows the calcaneum still lies in a plantar flex position. So this required a tenotomy. Another case in which the foot was chubby and it looked like that there is no need for tenotomy. However, the X-ray showed that this angle was more than 80 degree. If in doubt, get the X-ray of the other side, which showed that angle was less than 80 degree. So this tibiocalcaneum angle, lateral tibiocalcaneum angle, has been used, and I have been using this in some of my selected cases. Now, coming to the last aspect, management, casting, tenotomy, and bracing. Okay. So, what is the goal of Ponseti method? Now, that is to improve functional results, not to obtain a perfect anatomical correction as you try to achieve with open adduction. So, aim is to obtain a plantigrade mobile feet in a shortest possible time. So, why it is not the goal to obtain a perfect anatomical action, which may not be possible given the fact that talus has structural abnormalities, especially in a late cases. So they may not remodel completely. So that is not the aim. Aim is to have a good plantigrade, painless, mobile feet. And this goal is achieved by a Ponseti method. To understand the Ponseti method, you should have a knowledge of the pathoanatomy, which I have just covered, as well as the efficacy and technique of manipulation and casting, which is dependent on two principles that is called creep phenomena. Now, what is creep phenomena? That viscoelastic or rate dependent behavior of the collagen in the ligaments and tendons, how they change their shape, and clay modeling, that misshapen cartilaginous analog, basically of the talus. Told you that talus is the most deformed bone. So it is soft, cartilaginous at the time of birth, gradually changes to a normal bone by gentle manipulation and casting, which is called similar to clay molding. Okay. So creep phenomena and clay molding are the basis of the Ponseti method. So remember this line. We have done the functional anatomy, that biological response of young connective tissue and bone to changes in the direction of mechanical stimuli. So this is the retracting fibrosis, which is there in the clubfoot, which is called focal retractile fibrosis. And with gradual manipulation and stretching, what you do is you stretch this fibrous tissue, and these fibrous tissue are set at a new resting length by the cast. And gradually, the talar head and the navicular are also adapted to a new shape. And with the final cast, these cartilaginous deformations are fully corrected, joints are aligned, malalignment is corrected, and you can see in the shape, looks like a normal talar head and the normal navicular. So this is the principle of creep phenomena and the clay modeling. So this manipulation and guiding is based on three principles, which I think you all remember, that all the motion of the foot occurs around the talus. So talus is the fulcrum, bears the maximum forces. The whole foot, along with calcaneum, which is called calcaneopedis block, moves around the talus, and all the correction occurs simultaneously by the movement of abduction. Okay, try. See, so these are the three guiding principles for Ponseti to act. Okay. Now, sorry, how come this has come? Sorry, actually. So before we start with manipulation and casting, remember, this resident should be familiar uh, with the pathoanatomy and the principle. But remember, he has to be gentle. He has to be as gentle as possible. Don't make the child cry. Use the soft parts of the hand, that is the base of the thumb, not the tips, which are hard. Become ambidextrous. Use both your hands and mold around the prominences. Okay, the first step is correcting the cavus by dorsiflexing the first cuneiform metatarsal joint. I told you. Then you correct the talonavicular and the calcaneocuboid joint, the adduction deformity, by abducting. Then when you abduct, you also correct the varus by abducting the calcaneum. And last is the equinus by doing the tenotomy. So these are key steps: cavus, adductus, varus, and the equinus. And all these deformities are usually corrected simultaneously, but primarily the first cast corrects the cavus deformity. So how do you do? The It has to be done in a proper sitting position with the surgeon on the side of the foot. For the right foot, he sits on the right side, and the vice versa. The assistant is there, the trained assistant is there on the other side. So the reference point is the head of the talus, which lies just anterior to the little malleus. So first identify the little malleus, and the head of the talus lies just anterior to it. Okay. So how do you hold this? The surgeon's left hand especially the thumb, stabilizes the what? Head of the talus. And the right hand holds the forefoot. Let us see the positioning of the left hand. The left thumb identifies the talar head. Okay. And the left index and the middle finger stabilizes the medial malleus as to stabilize the distal tibia and the ankle joint. So this was the for the right foot. He is holding the talar head with the left hand. Okay. So what is the right hand doing? The right long finger is placed on the plantar aspect along the first metatarsal. The right index finger again placed on the medial forefoot in line with the first metatarsal. So why this is important? This long finger will correct the cavus and the medial finger, the index finger will correct the adduction deformity. And the thumb, which is stabilizing the forefoot, okay, placed over the dorsal aspect. Okay. So how do you apply? How do you manipulate? Elevate the first ray to correct the cavus deformity, and you continue to stabilize the talar head with the left thumb. Okay. So elevate the first ray with the long finger, remember. And with one or two casts, you are able to correct the cavus deformity. So what we have done, a pronated forefoot is now converted into supinated forefoot. So forefoot and the hind foot, they are now lie in a same plane. Okay. So initially forefoot was pronated and now it is supinated. So both forefoot and hind foot are now in the same plane. So what you do is abduct the supinated foot to correct the adductus and varus. The left hand is holding the head of the talus, and now you abduct the forefoot with the index finger and the hand. Okay. So remember, avoid this kite's hand position, which is an error. He was stabilizing the calcaneocuboid joint. Okay. And the Ponseti hand position, Ponseti is stabilizing the talar head. Okay. So what you do is you gradually maintain the stretch. The assistant applies the plaster padding, cast padding, and then he applies the plaster cast. Okay. And your hand is now stabilizing the knee joint. So just see the video. Okay. Now, what is important to understand at this point, you have to become ambidextrous. The surgeon now should take his hand out from the knee joint and use thumb to index and index to thumb, not only to mold the cast, but as well as to maintain the correction. Okay. So this is called one hand technique, where he uses both his hands to maintain the correction as well as to mold the cast. So this is very important. Molding the cast is also an essential step because otherwise the chances of foot slipping inside the cast. Okay. So the final step is extend above the knee, trim, and leave a plantar platform. Okay. And so how does this correct? The first cast usually corrects remove the cast in the clinic only, just before starting the manipulation. Remember, each cast shows gradual improvement, approximately 20 degrees each time. So typically cavus corrects in the first or second cast, adductus and heel varus usually correct by fifth to sixth cast by simple maneuver of abduction. Now you would be asking why abduction? Because the principle of functional interdependence. When the forefoot is abducted because of the tarsal ligaments attachment with forefoot and hind foot, the calcaneum also abducts. Okay? Forefoot abducts, calcaneum abducts. Well, calcaneum abducts, it everts and dorsiflexes. Okay? So you're able to correct the hind foot deformity. And what is residual left is now the ankle equinus, which is corrected by tenotomy. So with serial manipulation and casting, foot is abducted about 50 to 70 degree. And this is the time the foot is ready for tenotomy. Now, tenotomy again is not a difficult procedure, but remember, essential component of Ponseti method in almost, I would say, more than 95% of the cases. And it is not a lengthening, it's a complete transaction and only done when the rigid residual equinus is there, following correction of cavus, adductus, and varus. So common error is, commonly what I see, the resident bringing the child before these deformities are fully corrected. So if you do the tenotomy, there will be high chance of relapses. Deformity will not be fully corrected because subtalar dorsiflexion would only take place when the hind foot is completely abducted. Okay. So what are the indications for tenotomy? If you See, by scoring, the midfoot score is less than 1. Okay. The hindfoot score is more than 1, and the tailor head should not be palpable. Now, why this is important? When tailor head is not be, should not be palpable, this implies that the foot has achieved almost 50 degree of abduction. Okay. Clinically, you can see, evaluate the calcaneum abduction and ankle dorsiflexion. The foot should be adequately abducted, about 50 to 70 degree, and there should be 10 less than 10 degree of dorsiflexion, as like in this foot. The deformity, hindfoot deformity is corrected, but sorry, midfoot deformity is corrected, but hindfoot deformity is still there. Heel should be neutral or slight valgus, and even doubt, go for this accelerator tibiocalcaneum angle, which should be more than 80 degree. Now, judging a successful tenotomy is important. You should be able to hear that pop, sudden giving away. Those who are doing it, I think, when you can easily vouch for this. Okay? And you should be able to achieve at least 10 degree of dorsiflexion. And on palpation, there is a palpable gap. Okay? So post-tenotomy cast, apply a thin gap, a thin gauze piece. Remember, no sutures. It's a sutureless technique. Confirm the ankle dorsiflexion has been achieved. Final cast is given for 3 weeks and maintain that is cast is given full abduction achieved in the last casting and the dorsiflexion achieved following tenotomy. And no need, normally there is no need for admission, and the child is ready for bracing after 3 weeks. Now, briefly about the bracing, that is the last part. So you all have seen these are foot abduction braces, okay? And these comprises of two open shoe, okay, connected by a bar, which is equivalent to shoulder weight, available in various sizes depending on the foot size. And beauty of these braces is that when the child kicks, the gastrocnemius is stretched by the angle which bar has, and it has a peeping hole to actually see whether heel is sitting on the resting on the sole or it is high riding. So why bracing? Now, because clubfoot behaves like an elastic band, stubborn tendency for recurrence. And these are actually the braces which keep the foot abducted and dorsiflex, similar to the last cast. Okay. So, and it has been shown by multiple papers that without bracing, risk of recurrence is even more than 90% in infancy. I think this is the commonest reason for early relapse. And regular brace use has been prescribed, which reduces recurrence rate to even less than 10%. So, foot abduction bracing protocol, it is given on the last day when the cast is removed. Remember, the foot should not be without brace or cast anytime. Okay? If you don't have a brace on that day, make sure that you continue to give the cast till you have a proper size brace. It is worn 23 hours a day for 3 to 4 months, and then night and the nap time for another 4 to 5 years. Okay. So what is important, I want you to understand that this brace, foot abduction brace, had two angles for extension and abduction, which are called shoe up angle. This is the angle between the sole of the shoe and the bar in the coronal plane. So this is to stretch the gastrocnemius. This should be 10 degree, both for corrected as well as for the normal foot, even in a unilateral case. So the bar should be slightly dorsiflexed, bent 10 degree. It's called shoe up angle. And then you have a shoe out angle, which is the angle between the axis of the foot, this, and the orthogonal to the bar, that is perpendicular to the bar in the transverse plane. So this is to maintain the abduction. So this should be 70 degree in a bilateral cases, like in this case. And it should be 70 degree for the affected foot and 30 to 45 degree for the normal foot in a unilateral case. Okay. So this was in brief about the bracing. And remember, there is no role for ankle foot orthosis. And this is a common mistake which I have seen even in present time, that after correction, it is some feet are given ankle foot orthosis, which has behaved like a below knee cast. Okay. Similar to below knee cast, will not maintain the calcaneum in abducted position, and deformity is most likely to recover. So before I finish, just let me conclude verbally that I hope you all are familiar with the Ponseti method. Remember that in spite of being a simple method, you need to remember that it is a very specific method of manipulation, casting, bracing, as well as follow-up. So one must understand the intricacies of each of these steps to achieve a good outcome. And my request to all the residents, they must learn about the clubfoot and the Ponseti, even if they are posted in a specialized unit which are not doing pediatric orthopedics, because not only from the exam point of view, even as a general orthopedic surgeon, one must know the management of clubfoot. So thank you very much.
I have one or two questions for you.
Sure, sir.
One is that let's go with the bracing first.
Yeah.
It is a common complaint by the parents that the child starts crying at night once you put the brace on,
Mhm.
especially if the child is older. So, what is the
Definitely.
way to tackle that?
Uh, means older means, can you specify the
Maybe
age?
around 8 months, 9 months old child.
Okay.
Daytime child is playful, and once you are coming to nighttime bracing,
Mm. Good question. Uh, there are
it's a very,
there are
very
cases.
common complaint.
Yeah, I know. Though there is no cookbook answer to this, but let me share my thoughts. Uh, some of the parents, if they complain like this, what I would like to know whether the deformity is fully corrected or not, because I see some of these cases, either there is a minor relapse of the equinus, or it could be a 4 foot adduction which was not fully corrected. So there's a difficulty in brace wearing. So recently I had a case in which the complaint was similar to what you are saying, that the child had starts to crying whenever the brace is given. So when I examined, I found that the tenotomy, which was done somewhere else, I think either it was not complete, or maybe the post tenotomy cast was not given properly. So what I did after one or two stretching cast, I repeated the tenotomy, and after 3 weeks and then follow up, I could observe the child, the parents were happy, and the brace was well fitting, and the complaint was not there. One is this scenario. Second scenario could be the brace, which may have been not. There could be two reasons. Remember the length of the bar. It has been seen that child finds uncomfortable if the length of bar is too short, shorter than the shoulder width. So it is preferable to have a longer bar, even if it is slightly longer than the shoulder width. And the second part regarding the braces could be the shoe. Maybe the shoe size is small, or the leather is not good, hurting the child's foot. Maybe these are my viewpoints. What are
I'll just wish to add one or two more things.
Dr. PVN, you
Yeah,
can
one or two
point.
more things I wish to add.
yeah,
One or two more things. One is
yeah,
that
sure,
uh, I think it is essential to ask the parents to put a pair of cotton socks underneath the shoes.
yeah,
And
good point.
have seen children coming with rash where the one of the residents has failed to advise put in cotton socks. So number one. Number two is that what I would add here is that the bracing should not be advised only for the night time. It should be nap and night.
Yeah,
Means
definitely
whenever
you
the
have
child
mentioned
is sleeping,
that.
so
Naturally,
that psychologically he has in mind that once he is sleeping, the brace has to be on.
definitely.
Uh,
Very true.
and Dr. Vikas, another question is that in case of
Dr. PN Gupta, can I just add a comment?
yeah, yeah, yes, yes,
Actually, if you see 70 to 80% of cases, there is problem with the shoe of the brace, because it is kind of a shoe bite. You have to always check it. And what Dr. PN has told, that you have to would wear a cotton socks. Most of the time, this sorts out the problem.
Definitely.
So always, because there is, you have made a window on the lateral side, there is a small hole on the shoe. You have to always, when the complaint is there, you have to always check from that window whether the heel is properly placed, or it is not, is inside the shoe, or what is the problem with the shoe. So what I have found in 70 to 80%, if you correct those things, what Dr. PN has told, everything gets corrected.
Definitely.
Dr. Vikas. One more question.
Yeah,
In atypical clubfoot,
definitely.
after correction, do you keep that same 70 degrees angle or do you reduce it?
No, no. Good
After
point you have
correction
raised.
and while giving the brace, in that brace, do you keep that angle of 70 degrees or do you keep it lesser?
No, no, a good point you have raised, which I have not covered due to paucity of time. In a atypical club foot, remember, especially for my residents, that you have to keep the foot in a about 30 to 40-degree maximum. You should not hyper abduct, otherwise you are creating another deformity. So, and again, the method of manipulation in casting is slightly different. I think which they can, maybe the another section we can discuss individual, how do you manage the manipulate the atypical clubfoot. It has to be a two thumb technique. So atypical clubfoot which have to be have a different modified bracing as well as different manipulation.
Uh, Dr. Manish, you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I have a question with Dr. Vikas and probably Dr. PN. You can also add. Dr. Vikas, when the child starts going to the school in the daytime, is there any role of CTV shoes? And because you have not touched that topic, and if there is a role of CTV shoe, then what kind of shoe and what are the modifications in the shoe for CTV patient is done? Can you throw
Uh,
some light?
Manish, as per the Ponseti management, there is no role of CTV shoes, which are like a Biloni orthosis in a daytime. Now, your question is a walking child, a
Yeah,
child presenting late. So, what we do in these cases, we still keep the uh, orthosis, the foot abduction orthosis at for the night and the nap time. But for a walking child, what we do is instead of CTV shoes, we give a ankle foot orthosis, which can be placed under the shoes. Okay, so it behaves like a more like a CTV shoes, but it has a better compliance, and at least it tries to correct the four, it maintains the forefoot adduction. But having said this, normally in a typical idiopathic case, which is well corrected, in the present time, there is no role of CTV issues. Remember, it is become useless. PN,
I
maybe you
think
can.
I'll agree to Dr. Vikas that in the current era, there is no role of a modified shoe during the daytime. And it is basically the shoe one, all the residents should understand that all this orthosis and shoes, whatever, they are not actually going to correct the deformity. The orthosis or the foot abduction brace, what is given is actually to maintain that correction. It is not going to correct the deformity.
And moreover, can I add
Yeah,
that
please.
you want to have the suppleness also. If you are continue to give the shoes in the daytime and brace in the night time, the foot will not have time to breathe or to have its own active movements. So normally, once after the child starts walking, we leave and advise the child simple, flexible, normal shoes.
PN sir, Vikas
Yeah.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, in continuation with your bracing, actually in most of the clubfoot clinics across India, we use mostly in government sectors, we use Steenbeek brace.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
So for the postgraduate say, can you elaborate how it is different from the other old braces that we have
yeah.
used?
Actually, Dr. PN, I wanted to add this question. Can you explain the difference between the Dennis Brown, the Steenbeck? Means what are the difference and can you throw some light?
Dr.
PN,
Vikas,
you want to answer?
yeah, can you answer?
I would like to add few points. Actually, I think this Steenbeek brace is just a modified Dennis Brown brace. Okay, the Dennis Brown brace, the did not actually mention about the length of the bar, and moreover, these angles were not properly defined. The shoe out angle and the shoe up angle, actually in a Dennis Brown. However, the principle of both of them remain same, but actually the Steenbeek brace actually is more like a dynamic brace, and it defines when the child kicks, it dorsiflexes the ankle joint. Okay, when the child kicks, the other foot also dorsiflexes because of the simultaneous movements of both the ankle joint. In a Dennis Brown, old Dennis Brown, actually the foot were not dorsiflexed; they were more or less placed in a straight bar. this feature, this extension part was not there. Maybe you want to add something?
Yeah, only difference which I find is what Dr. Vikas has already elaborated, that the foot is not really dorsiflexed. It is kept at 90 degrees in a
Mm,
conventional Dennis Brown splint.
mm,
The advantage of Dennis Brown splint is that you have a dialable sort of rotation into that.
mm, mm.
So that is a little advantage of a Dennis Brown splint. But the disadvantage is that you cannot, it's not like keeping the foot in about 10 degrees of dorsiflexion. Otherwise, basically, both the braces, they are similar. Only thing is a little difference in the design, but the
Yeah.
purpose is similar.
And sir, what is actually Ponseti brace?
Ponseti brace is foot
Yeah.
abduction brace.
No, Ponseti brace is
Because
actually
sometimes,
I
examiners
don't
ask
think
the
that
postgraduates that what is actually Ponseti brace? Because in one of the books it has been given it's a Mitchell brace.
No, you're getting confused. The principle is foot abduction brace, and they are made by many other centers. So
Definitely.
Michel brace, then Dobbs brace. Actually,
Oh,
they are the having the same principle, but they have like different design where shoe can be detached and attach easily. The shoe can some bars have a different angle, so to make it more comfortable. So the principle is same.
yeah,
And
in Dobbs brace
Yeah,
you have a sort of a fulcrum in both the between the bar and the shoe, so that the child can actually have a better kicking,
definitely.
and it allows it to allows the child to kick it better, like this way and this way.
yes, sir. And
So
sir,
these are actually modifications of the same thing.
Yeah, actually, the basic principles remain the same, but I think everyone has tried to modify
sir,
according to their
sometimes
experience.
examiners present a different situation for postgraduates. If postgraduate has been asked that if the child is having only a single limb because of some syndromic association or what kind of that,
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
which brace or what shoe, what do you prefer in the maintenance phase?
Actually, this has been shown in number of like our seminars. How do you brace these kids
Yeah, because
with a like congenital amputation?
some
And
of the postgraduates ask me this question that
yeah,
what should
I,
we do
I,
in that case?
Show you one of. I'll tell you one of the solution. Okay. So in a child with like congenital amputation, where the other foot is not there, the one option is give a prosthesis. So give a short prosthesis, a temporary prosthesis, and then you brace the child.
Means how, sir?
Like
Actually,
child has
on
a, will,
You
Dr.
can make
Vikas
some
is
sort of
right.
arrangement where the other foot,
Put,
on the normal side, you can
put a
make some.
prosthesis and then you can,
like a
yes.
below knee prosthesis. You
Yeah.
can give a short prosthesis, and you can give a brace over the prosthesis on the amputated side and the abduction on the affected side. The
Okay.
other option is again giving a ankle foot orthosis, but this is a very rare situation,
Yeah,
and just for like rare situation, I have a different methods.
sir.
Yeah, even I would wish to add something again further, that a lot of these foot who have congenital amputations on the other side or congenital limb deficiencies, they are actually syndromic cases. Their behavior is very different from the idiopathic clubfoot.
Yeah.
And
So, Dr. Vikas, one question is
Yes.
that what is the incidence of a flat top talus after Ponseti? Do you have any experience in this?
Uh, I don't have an incidence like any study, but I do see cases, especially cases coming late to me.
Yes.
Those who had some kind of casting, which I don't think would be Ponseti. So they present with a difficult problem of flattening of the talus due to forced dorsiflexion, and becomes a very difficult problem to manage these cases. And
I
probably they
think,
require some kind of even surgical intervention.
yeah, I
Not
think
in
I'll
a,
agree to that.
yeah,
I'll agree to that. But if there is a flat top talus, the equinus becomes very, very resistant to correction.
yeah,
And the key to prevent that is to be very, very gentle during the process of manipulation.
definitely. That gentleness is the key word. And in fact, how much gentle the Pirani has shown that you extend your thumb and the limit at which you start having pain, that shows that there is a resistance. So it should be very gentle so that you're stretching stretching the flex thumb to the level of extension only. Don't go beyond further extension because
My, I take a little different way of doing it. Is that you manipulate the foot, you manipulate, and once the child starts moving his upper limbs, that means he's uncomfortable or he's sucking on a baby soother. The moment he stops sucking on that baby soother, so that means he's uncomfortable. So you have to use your force within that limits. And once you see that you're, because it's very easy for you being much stronger than the child to overcome the,
definitely, if you actually damage the soft
you
tissues,
know,
actually you
the,
create more edema. And
yes,
Dr.
agree.
Dr. Vikas,
Vikas,
can I?
And,
yeah, Manish sir,
Sorry,
आप
sorry, Dr. PN, you were telling something.
no, no, I mean, my connection is a little unstable, so please go ahead.
Dr. Vikas, for benefits of the postgraduate, there are for a few questions. When do you start the Ponseti casting?
okay, let me answer this. I think if you go read the old textbooks, uh, they would write that if the child is being born a breech delivery, you just start manipulating the foot before the head comes out. Okay. So, what is the implication behind this fact? Is that you start as early as possible. But having said this, there is no hurry. It's not a emergency management to start the Ponseti treatment on day one. Why this is important? Because you, as the child is born, you want to have a maternal child bondage. And moreover, the foot is quite small, tender, and at times their skin is not very healthy. So what you do is you explain the mother or the caregiver that you then gently stretch and ask the caregiver to bring the child in the next week, 10 days. And even studies have shown the childs who have been casted on the day one versus day 10 versus 3 weeks, the outcome is same. So remember, friends, there is no hurry. Don't jump into casting a day one old child. Week 10 days is good enough. Okay? But meanwhile, just inform the parents. Okay? Yeah.
I'll just
Dr.
wish to add one or two things, which should be like very basic principles for when to start casting. One is that the skin should not be very tender. So newborn skin is very, very tender. And second thing is that the foot size should be manageable. So that is usually around what I will agree with Dr. Vikas, that's around 10 days to 14 days roughly. And that is when you're comfortable enough. So only difference is that we normally at our center, we do not ask the mother to manipulate the foot because we feel that they will actually overstretch the enthusiasm.
And Dr. PN,
So
connection.
we actually don't ask them to do anything because they do not know where. Yes, sir.
Dr. PN's, I think, is
Vikas sir,
slightly unstable. No, 1 minute, Ravi.
sir.
One question. Let me finish it because it will break this link. Dr. Vikas, till what age this Ponseti method can be done? Suppose child comes very late with a neglected foot. Till what age you feel in your experience that this Ponseti method works?
Okay, I think we can have a next webinar on neglected clubfoot, but let me answer this. Now, with increasing success of Ponseti in older children, the upper age limit has become a moving target. Okay. So, as my own experience, remember the more important than the upper age limit, what is important to understand the flexibility of the foot. So Penny has beautifully classified this neglected clubfoot based on the intrinsic flexibility into mildly flexible, moderately flexible, and rigid. So if the foot is flexible, even at the age of 9 or 10, one can manage with the Ponseti method. And most of these untreated clubfoot, which we say neglected, behave better than the surgically corrected relapsed clubfoot. So my oldest child was, I would say, till date is 11-year-old girl. And I have photographed video also, maybe I'll show you next time, that she responded well to Ponseti method. But having said this may not be true for every child who's 10-year-old age. So you have to see the foot and the flexibility and the compliance by the parents, whether they are agreeing for this prolonged casting sessions. So I think upper age limit, the concept is moving up. PN, you want to add?
Yeah, I wish to add one point here that once you are casting an older child, you have to see I agree with Dr. Vikas that you have to see the flexibility and the expected amount of number of casts required. There are some rigid feet which you can go even up to 15, 20 casts. But that is too much. 20 casts means around 5 months, 6 months of plastering, 25, 26 casts. So 6 months of plastering is not doable in an older child. So if the foot is a little rigid, then maybe one or two casts you can try. And if the scores are not improving, if the foot is not getting corrected, then you can consider a surgical exercise in those kids which specifically they are rigid. But yes, most of the time I have given up till around 8 or 9 years of age, and I have found it good without the need for surgical exercise. Only ones which require a surgical exercise are the ones which are stiff feet following surgery, and almost all of them they have been done elsewhere. We have not operated any of the feet with BMSDR. I mean, for the past maybe 15 years.
Dr. Vikas, with your
Just
experience,
Manish, just
yeah.
want to add what Dr. PN has said is absolutely true. Even in these rigid feet, what initial Ponseti casting can help to correct some of the deformities. At least it can decrease the quantum of surgery. Even if you are planning like uh, mid-foot surgery, so at least by casting you can correct the forefoot adduction or decrease the severity of the deformity. So Ponseti definitely has a role even in these older children, even if they require surgical intervention.
Dr. Vikas, in your experience, or what is the international data that though you have elaborated, you have told certain points, that what are the percentage of failure of Ponseti method, because it's a gold standard, and if they fail, what could be the, if you can elaborate more points that why does Ponseti method fail and what is the percentage of failure?
In which type of foot? Idiopathic,
Idiopathic,
syndrome?
idiopathic. We're talking about idiopathic.
Now, in idiopathic, the success rate, as per the paper which I reviewed about 2 months back, the success rate is almost 95% in idiopathic foot. And the commonest reason what they are is experiencing is due to the relapses. The failure is due to relapses uh, or which they require, and most of their relapses are actually the late relapses. What they have observed due to some intrinsic, due to the growth factors, natural growth, and muscle imbalance. Some of these feet have underlying neurological etiology, which is not clearly visible. It may not be visible deformity like myelomeningocele, could be a minor muscle imbalance. And these are the feet which actually require tendon transfer. So the success rate is 95% idiopathic clubfoot. However, most of their feet, those who go for relapse, they go for tendon transfer, which acts like a dynamic brace, and and this procedure definitely has given a good results in an older clubfoot with relapses.
Okay. Dr. Vikas, what is this rocker bottom foot?
Rocker bottom foot, first is the congenital, which is called congenital vertical talus, due to talonavicular dislocation. The navicular is dorsally dislocated on the talar head. Now, I think most of us can differentiate between a congenital rocker, the congenital vertical foot, or a rocker bottom foot from the club foot. So my request to all postgraduates is, whenever you see a foot, check 4 signs. Is there cavus? Is there varus? Is there equinus? And is there adductus? If all these 4 signs are there, maybe in varying severity, it is a club foot. Now, rocker bottom foot, another rocker bottom foot is iatrogenic. When you're trying to, I've shown you some of the pictures, like when you're trying to correct the dorsiflexion by stretching the forefoot. Now, you have corrected the adductus varus by stretching the medial plantar structures, okay? But you cannot stretch the tendoachilles because it is made up of fibers which are non-stretchable. Their collagen fibers behave differently. If you try to stretch them, they will will not allow stretching, and the foot will break at the midfoot level, okay, at the Lisfranc joint or at the Chopard joint. So that's why Ponseti, after extensive study, observed that better to transect the tendo Achilles, and even MRI studies by Pirani have shown that tendon regenerates very well because tendon sheath is intact. When once you are doing the tenotomy, you are just cutting the tendon, and majority of the tendon sheath is intact, and the tendon regenerates. We have seen fibula regenerating well, even in a younger child, almost complete fibula. So the tendon regenerates well and retains the normal, the different length, stretch, the resting length, which we have achieved with tenotomy.
Dr. PN, you wanted to
Yeah,
tell
just wanted to add one point here, that a lot of people they confuse metatarsus adductus varus with clubfoot.
Mhm.
Now, one very main differentiating point is that if you are able to dorsiflex the foot beyond neutral, because visibly both look almost similar, the deformities they look similar, but if you are able to dorsiflex the foot beyond neutral, it is never a clubfoot.
Very important point raised. Common mistake is just diagnosing adductors, metatarsal adductors with clubfoot, which requires a different method of casting if it is severe. Yes, Ravi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Uh, Actually, just I have a question for regarding the Ponseti, this Pirani scoring. One of the postgraduate has asked that in some of the books there are 10 points that have been given.
Yes.
So we usually take 6 points. So is there any valuation for that? Why we take 6 points or what should be preferred? Because even in Campbell it has been given 10 points.
See, initially, Pirani described 10 points. That has been picked up in the Campbell. But he has done validation studies and he found that these 6 points are valid.
Okay.
So currently, what is used world over is only 6 point scoring.
Okay.
It's
And
actually
Ravi,
modified Pirani.
And
yeah, just to add
yeah,
that when after validation he observed that 6 point scoring has better inter-observer as well as intra-observer reliability as
reliability,
compared to 10 points. Okay,
definitely.
and they were giving the same information which 10 points were giving.
And Vikas sir,
So
with respect
One minute,
to
Dr. Ravi.
sir.
Dr. Vikas or Dr. PN, can you tell that who is Dr. Pirani and where does he practice? For just people, if this question is asked in few exams that who is Dr. Pirani?
Pirani was born in Uganda to Indian parents, and from there he in Uganda he created a clubfoot model, which is now has been well published, and from there he migrated to Canada, Columbia Hospital.
He
So
is
right
in
now is
Vancouver.
Canada, and right now is more into the public health, uh, making programs and the writing books and booklets, then into clinical practice. And he has, I hope you all have seen, he is poliotic, but his energy is marvelous.
Yes.
Vikas sir, is there any age for Pirani scoring? That if a postgraduate gets the 3-year-old child or 4-year-old child or 2-year-old child,
Yeah,
can
yeah.
he be asked by the
Actually,
examiner?
now I wanted to cover, there is now a new scoring, which is called PBS, Pirani, S for Sinclair and B is for Bohm. PBS scoring, which has been given for a walking child. Okay. Pirani scoring is not validated for older child. Remember this point. He himself says that my
Older
scoring
means
should
more than 1
more
year.
than one, more than one. So he himself says that my scoring is not validated, and some of the signs like empty heel, posterior crease may not be very reliable. But in absence of any reliable scoring, Pirani scoring is still used. It's better to have some kind of scoring rather than none. But maybe I'll share, because this talk was mainly for the beginners. I have not covered PBS. I have few slides that there is new scoring is coming, which is better, has better reliability and easier to apply in an older child. And they can go to the article. It's called PBS scoring, freely downloadable article. Okay.
Yeah. Sir, there are few questions regarding the syndromic clubfoot. And
Yeah.
that which is the most common deformity in case of recurrence? First question.
First, not syndromic or idiopathic.
Sir, syndromic clubfoot.
The first common deformity, the first deformity is usually the equinus, both in idiopathic as well as syndromic. Moreover, syndromic clubfoot are difficult to correct. At least, all the deformities are sometimes not easily correctable, and some of the deformities do remain. Okay? But equinus remains the first deformity.
Okay. And cases where tenotomy is required in all cases of syndromic clubfoots, or
Now, syndromic is a actually heterogeneous group. So, what syndrome? Some of the syndromes deformity may not be as severe. Some of the syndromes like arthrogrypotic deformity may be very severe. Even tenotomy may not help. So there is no a single answer. But most of the cases they require tenotomy, and at times they do require even posterior release. Syndromic cases I've seen that you have to lengthen the tendon, cut the posterior capsule, subtalar joint. So depending on the case to case basis, they require a la carte surgery.
sir,
Am I right, Dr. P?
I
if a
think I'll
child,
add that almost always the equinus is very, very rigid in these cases of syndromic clubfoot. So almost, I mean, all the cases will require some sort of surgery on tender case, and usually it's a tenotomy.
sir, there is one question regarding to this. If a child has associated CP or DDH or hemimelias, then is it considered to be a syndromic clubfoot, or matlab,
No, it is not considered, which DDH is not considered as syndromic. It could be a coexisting condition.
definitely, sir. Yeah, sure. And approximately how many casts?
I would add
in
something,
syndromic clubfoot?
Dr. Ravi. I would add like to add something.
Yep.
That lot of times there are children who have arthrogryposis, and
Then
they
become
have a
syndromic.
clubfoot, they have a DDH, but they are easily recognizable. But association of clubfoot with DDH per se, though it has been mentioned in the literature, uh, I have almost never seen increased incidence vis-a-vis the normal population. I'm sure Dr. Vikas will share, I mean, agree with
Yeah,
this,
sure.
that the incidence
There is
of
no increased
DDH with
incidence here.
there is no increase. So they can be counted as idiopathic. But syndromics are very easily recognizable by increased intercanthal distance, depressed bridge of nose, and multiple other abnormalities, including some of them they have some dentition abnormalities, some high arched palate, and other associations like congenital hernias. Yes, where congenital limb deficiencies or dysplasias are there, something like a fibular deficiency or a tibial deficiencies. These are actually counted in the syndromic group, and their
Showed you the
behavior is
photograph
very
also, yeah.
different than the idiopathic clubfoot because a lot of them, these children, they might be having tarsal coalitions. So their treatment is a little different. Of course, you have to see the flexibility, and if they're correctable, you can correct it. But if they're not correctable, they are not flexible, then you might have to consider some alternative treatment.
Sir, Vikas sir, there are two last questions. One question is that with respect to neurogenic clubfoot, is the casting and bracing protocol same? You move like in the idiopathic clubfoot, or there is some sort of different things that you start from the beginning?
No, the casting manipulation and casting remain the same, but the only thing is you have to be very gentle because some of these foot maybe don't have the sensations. Okay? Could be
Yeah.
asensitive. So what you have to see is that, and most of these feet, I make sure that whosoever is applying, he is not making it due precaution, not giving too much pressure. So it has to be very gentle, and casting should not be very tight, and you have to prognosticate the parents that it might recur, and there could be other problems such as sore. So, and what they are counseled that if the child cries continuously after the casting, they should not wait, they should remove the cast immediately at home only and come to our clinic next day. So the principle remains the same, but you have to have the more actually should be vigilant in these cases.
And sir, with other question is that what is your threshold to terminate your Ponsity to start the Ilizarov or Jess? Means one of the postgraduate asks, then when should we consider the fixation, external fixators?
In
Except
older child,
Ponsity?
wants to, are you asking an older child, he means walking child?
Yeah, in any child. What is your indication that I will not move with Ponsity now? I have to move with Jess or Ilizarov, whatever, but I am not going to move with Ponsity.
Okay.
So
No,
what are your
I think
indications on that?
I think he is trying to refer to the older case because the younger child will not consider even at some kind of something. So in an older child, what I look is first to rule out any syndromic features or secondary cause, like you sometimes fail to examine the spine. There is no myelomeningocele or any kind of uh, other joints are normal. Then you assess the flexibility of the foot. Okay, in a flexible foot, in a completely flexible foot, older child untreated, what I've seen, my own experience, that these feet behave very well to Ponseti, though it might take a longer time. What happens in these feet that after a few casts, you may not see any correction. It is like a stone on the hill. A large stone is there. You are pushing, pushing, and maybe after 10 minutes, it starts giving away. So it is like these. These foot tissues, contractures are very tight. So you have to give few casts. Maybe I cannot say a specific number, 3 or 4 casts, and then you see the foot starts getting corrected. Now, what is the aim? Ponseti aim is not to have a anatomical correction. So what I want to achieve that a foot which was the sole was facing medially, it should become plantigrade and it should be chewable. So when I see the foot is responding normally, I continue with the Ponseti casting and add to it. If I see like after few casts, I see that forefoot adduction is corrected, but the heel varus remains. Then and I see that in spite of 2 or 3 casts, there is no further correction. The score is not dipping down. What I would like to add in this case is some kind of surgical intervention, which is called a la carte surgery, where I would like to do a midfoot resection, calcaneocuboid or a cuboid wedge resection, depending on these cases. Now, having said this, I feel that foot can be easily connected, adding to the posterior release. A foot which has been surgically corrected, quite deformed, and I see that Ponseti is not going to fully correct these feet, I do what is my take home is I do few stretching casts so as to make the foot supple or skin healthy. And then I'll definitely go for some kind of surgical intervention, which I usually prefer is Elizro. Okay. Used to give just before that, but now I prefer Elizro. In a younger child, a simple Elizro without osteotomy, less than 8 years of age. And in an older child, 10 or 11, prefer to add an osteotomy, especially I see the deformities are rigid. I like to add the V osteotomy. But after giving 1 or 2 casts, not case to case basis, if I see the foot is quite rigid, scarring, and I know that casting will not make a difference, I usually, with due counseling, I start with a surgical intervention. So there is no threshold, but after 2, 3 casts, if you don't see any improvement, I think in a surgically operated, usually you don't actually see an improvement. You go for surgical intervention. Yes, Dr. PN. Dr. PN.
Yeah,
You're
I mean, if you have an objective answer to this, my feeling is after 2 casts, your deformity is not budging. It's the same. If it is improving, then I would like to continue further. If after 2 casts, it is not budging, it is same. Like you have a cavus which is not improving after 2 casts at all. I would consider some alternative way of management, which could be anything ranging from a la carte surgery or Ilizarov or whatever. But yes, I do give about 2 to 3 casts, and if it is
I
it is
think for
like
exam
deformity is improving,
purposes,
then I will continue.
yeah, exam purposes, they can answer 2 to
Yeah,
3 cast and scoring. The score is
yeah,
not
yeah.
coming down.
Who is actually scoring? That is what I wanted to say. That's yes, Dr. Manish.
Dr.
Yes,
Vikas,
sir.
I've seen certain Elizarov surgeon when they do Elizarov, they say that we are doing in this Ponseti method
Yeah.
because there is a conventional Elizarov described, which we were taught. Do you have any experience of using the Ponseti type with Elizarov correction?
Yeah, what these surgeons are doing is placing a wire in the talus so as to simulate the Ponseti type of correction. Okay. I have done my last case. I have done method similar to this, where I fixed the talus initially, and once you could correct the forefoot deformity and hindfoot varus, this wire can be removed. Okay, so I don't see any negative aspect of this method. which is to mimic the Ponseti uh, way of correcting the foot by Elizero. Although the numbers are not much, but I do see a merit in applying Elizero this way. But definitely depends on the foot shape. At times, foot is very deformed. It looks almost like completely deformed, and passing a wire and attaching to the tibial thing may not be feasible. Okay.
Dr. Vikas, in this JES, etc., there is something known as fractional distraction. Can you elaborate to the postgraduates? Because sometimes they ask what is fractional distraction.
Although I've stopped using JES, but fractional distraction means a differential distraction. A differential because there is a adduction deformity. So what you do, medial struts are rotated faster than the lateral struts. So it's almost double the time, 4 times the medial struts versus 2 times the lateral struts. Now this philosophy is also used even in Elizero. It's called differential distraction so as to avoid the compressing the soft tarsal bones. Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. So that can be taken up in Elizarov.
Yeah.
And Dr. Vikas, previously, they used to do this decancellation of cuboid. When you do Elizarov, do you do that also?
No, I think this has been discarded.
Discarded.
There is no role of decancellation. Yeah. What you do
Vikas,
is mid-foot correction. You can take a wedge,
Yeah.
calcium
Vikas sir,
Yeah.
in one of your slide you mentioned about post-surgical clubfoot.
Yeah.
So in post-surgical clubfoot, sometimes we find intoing, or
Yeah.
for that intoing, you wait for some time or directly go for supramalleolar osteotomies or what?
Uh, Intoing of the foot, you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, yes, sir.
So
The
what we have to
internal
see,
because of internal tibial torsion sometimes. Internal tibial torsion sometimes find in post-surgical clubfoot.
actually, this torsion concept is very controversial, and it has been seen that the torsion is very secondary, and it is actually not there most of the time. Now, this recent paper by Hollett showed
Yeah.
that even hip has an increased internal rotation, which is the cause of intoing. And most of the cases in which you see the intoing is due to foot itself. The foot deformity is contributing to the intoing. The forefoot adduction is there. Okay. So I have never done supramallar or tibial osteotomy. Maybe you
No,
have
I
any
have
experience?
never.
No.
No, I never done supramalleolar
Thanks.
derotation. I mean, tibial torsion is actually not really contributing
Yeah.
to the foot deformity. So,
Dr. Vikas, one very common, because this tibial torsion is a very common postgraduate question, is that why do you apply cast above knee? Can you elaborate the points, because this is quite often asked in the exams, in the Viva.
Now, the first point is above knee cast prevents the cast from slipping. Okay. So you have to be above knee. You know, in tibial fracture, you give above knee cast so that you immobilize the joint proximal and distal. So in a clubfoot, you don't want the cast to slip and create a complex clubfoot, which is an iatrogenic deformity. A second thing is when you give a above knee cast, you can maintain the foot abduction because now you are actually externally rotating the foot. The fulcrum lies at the knee joint. When you're applying a cast, you will see that you're stabilizing the knee joint as well. So if you give a below knee cast, you cannot maintain the foot abduction, required abduction. Okay? And abduction is essential to stretch the medial soft tissues or retractile fibrosis. So these are two important reasons. Now, again, I would like to add that in an older child, you would avoid above knee cast in 90 degree of flexion. So if they get a case in an older child or a question, they should answer that in an older child, I would like to give a cast in 5 to 10 degree of knee flexion, just so that they're able to ambulate as well as prevent the cast from slipping.
And as Dr. PN has told that this internal tibial torsion. So because previously there was a lot of stress that where you should apply the cast. One of the point was that you can correct the internal tibial torsion. But
I think this has been overstated.
uh,
Torsion is not there.